Welcome to the final chapter of Trials of a King. Last time, Cecil actually defeated his doppelganger, Dameon, and he actually reunited with Rosa as they made their way to the Sylph Cave. But it was an ambush, and Cecil was actually knocked out cold by Dameon. And apparently, Rosa was actually in a daze thanks to a dark crystal that Dameon possessed. I'm pretty sure he got the information from Cecil the Vessel himself. Cecil the Vessel, wow, it rhymes. Anyway, he probably got the information from him anyway. So, made it to the darkest depths where he can increase his power with the dark crystal, and with it, he put Rosa in a daze, and they actually convinced Cecil, the dwarves informed Cecil they were heading to the Sylph Cave, but it was a trap. Instead, Dameon held Rosa hostage, but Cecil actually confronted Dameon, but he lost at the first time out because of the powers of the Dark Crystal and how his darkness was actually infinite. So, thanks to that Kingdom Hearts song I just found, Rosa actually restored Cecil back to health, saying that she'll always love him no matter what, and as long as she's by his side, he shall never die alone. And he wouldn't, you know? They're both healers, and they love each other very much so much that, yeah, they can't possibly die together. They're both skilled healers. So, with the Arise and the white magic restoring him both internally and externally, Cecil actually possessed the light again. He returned to the light, and he was able to defeat Dameon, but just barely. They were hanging by the precipice, and thanks to Holy, casted by Rosa, which is her best white magic move, by the way. I like Holy. She casted it on Dameon, which made him fall into the magma pit below. And he dropped the dark crystal. I don't think it's incinerated, though, because, you know, there's always 4 of them. So, they reunited, and Cecil's necklace, the birthday gift, was actually an inclination that he never gave up on her. This was a reminder of their relationship. So, with the lunar necklace, Rosa knew that Cecil would always be faithful to her. So they embraced, and they made it somewhere inside the Sylph Cave. And I should warn you, this would be a tender moment. So, here we are in the last chapter. Chapter 8. The next chapter contains some suggestive themes. Reader discretion is advised. This is where things could get a little rough. I tried to keep it as T-rated as I possibly could, so you'll just have to bear with me on this one. As Cecil and Rosa finally get a chance to be... Well, you get the picture. Let's get this over with. Again, I suggest you skip to the part where it describes Tenebrae if you happen to be too sensitive. Moving on, although it will make it a little gory. Rosa led Cecil to the Chatel house deep within the Sylph Cave. This was the place where the fairies lived, and they always recognized it as the house where they saw Young in a comatose state after they rescued him from the explosion at the Tower of Babel. Well, the fairies rescued him. This is the place? Yes, Cecil. I've made some arrangements here. The Sylphs were more than willing to assist me, and they let me use it for a little while. They always knew the day would come. They were so kind, and they were very aware and supportive of our union. They were just a bunch of lovebirds. Oh, I see. Cecil just stood there and pondered deeply of the situation. He was indeed nervous. Cecil? Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. It's just that... I know. It's all right. You have my consent, Cecil. Don't be afraid. Took her in, her scent and all. They quietly entered the wooden house. It was empty inside. To the left was a bed, a little nightstand with a ruby candle on it. Shut the blinds over the window to keep the light out and provide some privacy. They hit the Then he lit the candle with a match while Rosa washed her face, removing the horrendous paint. She also changed back into her normal clothing, her elegant dress, her purple hairband, and all that. Cecil was so relieved she looked like herself again, the loving person he knew throughout most of his life. On the bed he watched her emerge. She was so beautiful. He couldn't turn away. His heart went wild as he gazed at her while she was walking to him. She sat down beside him and cupped his face. Even she looked as nervous as he was. Still, their eyes met. He laid his hands loosely on her shoulders. Well, Whatever the future may hold for us, we may never know. We must not fear it, but embrace it at this moment. Yes. They weren't sure how long they held each other. It was as if time had stopped and no longer existed. It felt as if the universe was focused upon them. They slowly closed their eyes, leaned in, and parted their lips. His thick, dry lips brushed over her thin, moist lips. There was nothing holding them back now. Dameon was finally defeated, and for once Cecil was no longer concerned of Dragon Rose or the Injukhal. All he cared about was the here and now with Rosa, his best friend and lover. They'd both desired this place and time since they tied the knot. As they held their faces steady, Cecil and Rosa dove in deeper, feeling and hearing their hearts beat hard as they intertwined, their sporadic breathing, their minds racing as they absorbed every new sensation. As they kissed with open mouths, Cecil lowered his hands to her neck, then to her back, her skin feeling as soft as a cloud. Rosa followed, feeling his as hard and tight, like an anchor holding a straying buoy. He was her anchor, protecting her against all odds and from the evil and corruption plaguing her mind. No more. He was with her. Both sighed in relief, and Cecil removed her ribbon, revealing her long locks. Rosa did the same with his headband, having the same free effect. Then his armor was discarded. His body became more flimsier and irritated from his strains on his body. After that, he was surrounded in a soothing glow as his body was recovering from its physical and emotional wounds. His scars were healing as if they hadn't seen he first transformed into a paladin. He was so relaxed, so at ease. Continued undressing her. First were the footwear, capes, down to her inner clothing. They hesitated. Still the urge was hanging over them like a heavy cloud waiting to burst. Rosa, then Cecil threw aside the remaining articles of fabric. They trembled as they gazed at each other. Using the blanket to conceal themselves, they lay down slowly. He held himself up with his strong hands to prevent from crushing her fragile body. Once more they kissed passionately and explored one another. Their temperature rose and sank, and it was gentle, yet their minds were wild with every touch, taste, and movement. He then went to Rosa's stomach. He was mesmerized by the texture and the sweetness, almost like tasting snow, but it was soft, not cold. Suddenly had a ravenous appetite. He wanted to eat all of it. As his warm, rough tongue scraped her skin, she let out a gasp. Stopped, worried as if he heard her, but her expression encouraged him to keep going. He did, and it was very electrifying. Rubbed her legs and became curious as he went even lower. Cecil touched the soft, wet palate. Eventually, when she recovered, she did the same to his. Cecil's body rotated. He needed her now, though he was still too nervous. He stopped. Rosa held him back with her finger, then she stubbornly nodded for his assent. Slowly went to her and whispered in pride, "Let me give to you my hallowed light." Rosa gave him permission as she guided him inside. She looked down, but Cecil kept her face up to look at his compassionate eyes, so she wouldn't flinch. Their faces were completely illuminated by the candle's soft hue. There was no turning back. They must cast their fears aside as their bodies merged. Their hearts were beating rapidly and hard like a group of exotic drums. His breathing became more heavy, and he dove to Rose's belly again. He needed to relieve the both of them simultaneously. He figured this was the way. When she was ready, she demanded him to go deeper. Without hesitation, he blushed. Cries of passion rang out as they went faster, deeper, and harder. They felt their bodies would explode like a volcano during the quake until... Cecil! His breath was caught in his throat as soon as he went still. His eyes shot open wide as he gazed down at her. She was just awestruck as him. He collapsed on the pillow beside her. He looked spent, like all those other times he fell during battle. With an iota of strength left, she turned to him and gave him a sweet kiss on his forehead and smiled. Cecil's tired eyes barely opened as he tried to grin back. Then he invited her over and they cocooned each other in a tight embrace before darkness swept over them. Elsewhere at Tenebrae, the Injukhals were gathering for a ceremony. Dragon Rose and the former chief Abdullah were bound against each of the gargoyle totem poles. Their brethren were completely unaffected, as if they were under the thrall of their new, more powerful master, Dameon. Since Dameon was slew by Cecil and Rosa, Daemon's power and insanity grew tenfold. At the same time, Dragon Rose returned to her senses as she realized she was being controlled by him. Abdullah didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. They were too late as they found out about Daemon's corruption. Still, they were both ambushed and betrayed by the people they were trying to protect. They couldn't fathom their sudden descent into madness and savagery. Cecil saw all of this. It was happening in real time, though much like his dream at Mist, there was little to nothing he could do except watch. It was all a terrifying vision, as he couldn't believe what he saw and heard. The decorative totem poles looked more sinister than he remembered them. The huge blazing bonfire, the numerous tall torches illuminated the village, emphasizing their demonic features. The tribesmen were enticing at the center as the exotic drums beat steadily. Through another foreign language, the captives kept begging to be freed, but they wouldn't budge. They were so enthralled by this. Especially when their leader emerged into the crowd. For the first time he saw him, Dameon was wearing a black shawl with some kind of burnt orange bird of prey. Basically it's what he looks like in a tribal ceremony, by the way. You will see him later. Cecil felt his brethren cried out as he presented himself in front of them. He was short compared to Abdullah, yet he was almost the same height as his daughter. Then Cecil felt something grab his leg. A very pale arm was pulling him, and it belonged to a being that emerged from the ground. It was like a zombie, as it gazed onto him with his white eyes. He recognized him as Prince Edward. His barred tunic was tarnished, and he kept persuading him in a monotone voice. Cecil, you must join us. The Injukhals awaits you. Nothing more but their humble servant. What? Edward? That can't be! He eventually saw more of his fallen friends and grew more horrified. Pelham and Porum, Rydia, Young, Edge, Sid, including the E-Pops and Naming Way, even Luca and King Jayat, and soon was Cain! They each spoke to him in the same manner as the perished princes. Join us, Cecil. You must, as we have. Dameon shall see to it. You will honor them, or this will be your fate. Be a part of the Injukhals, or a part of the undead. Your choice. The paladin just stood there petrified. No! Never! I mustn't! As they crept closer and closer, he looked over the circle, literally, as he hovered above them. He was a translucent spirit, and the aborigines never noticed him. Dameon raised his arms over their deafening roar. Silence, my servants! We shall make our traitors pay for their sins of appalling us. For days we've grown tired of his and Dragon Rose's corruptive rule over us. We'll take back what is rightfully ours. They will die with no relent, and be soaked in their own vile blood. Warrior handed him a spear covered in the crimson liquid. Its tip was burned. It shined over the campfire as he walked over to them. Dameon, you've gone completely mad! You are my most promising pupil. and you were destined to be our next clan leader. You were always respectful to me. I hadn't once begrudged you. Instead of being righteous, you were only using our people, my daughter, and even the noble man Cecil to feed your need for power and lust for darkness. I can no longer forgive you for this. Struggled more against the ropes, but they hardly even moved an inch. Dragon Rose was just as devastated. Dameon, you've used me for all your greed and evil, and your people have noticed this. I thought you were just, and I was once betrothed to you. We were very close, and until now, we were both corrupt even when we took in Dameon. Tucked her chin. True, I had used you. We were quite a couple, and we had an unwavering affection for each other. Dameon was just as reliable as you were. Then, I'd lost him as well as your loyalty. You worked for Dameon and accepted his corruption? How could you? I'm sorry, Father. I didn't know until now. You've betrayed me. You were Abdullah's precious little pawn before I drove you away. You've convinced yourself and me under your own free will that you wish to overthrow your dominant dad. You made this decision, not me. I only exaggerated it. After he took the spear out from the flames, Cecil watched in horror. The drums were building up like thunder. Dameon, stop! He charged to him, but instead he went right through him. He looked at himself with a startle, and he could just listen as the helpless victim screamed in terror. And now, you both shall perish as I rule the land over. The percussion was irresistible. Dameon threw it straight into Dragon Rose's heart. The spear ignited along with her body. Everyone screamed with joy except the rattled red man. Dameon just cackled hysterically over the massacre. Then he retrieved another spear, already having its point burning. Before he launched it, he slowly stepped toward his remaining captive and whispered into his ear, Long live the chief. Your obligation is complete. I'm the new destined clan leader now. I shall pay you back for all the pain, suffering, and chaos you've brought to me and to my own brethren. Backed away and raised his head. Fare thee well, Abdullah. He stabbed the spear into his chest, and the weapon in his limp body incinerated almost instantly. Dameon just raised his arms and cried in triumph. His newfound clan followed as they embraced his conniving, rampaging rule. Back at the wooden house in the Sylph Cave, Cecil immediately woke up with a sharp breath. It was almost as cold and painful as if a Blizzaga spell went into his throat. Rosa awakened. Cecil, are you alright? I just had a nightmare. He leaned down to his broad shoulder. His soft, tight texture was very relaxing. The welcoming sensation calmed him down. It was the most gruesome thing I've seen. Tell me what you've dreamt. I was in Tenebrae. I saw the Injukhal embrace Dameon as their new clan leader. The former chief Abdullah and her daughter Dragon Rose were both slewed by him with burning spears. He had emitted such horror, such lust for dominance, such malice. He was the one who started this silent civil war, and the chief didn't know it. Neither was his daughter aware of all this. She was being used as well, just as I was. We must stop him. Rosa looked at him almost as depressed as he was. Cecil, I understand their plight and your determination to put an end to Damon's foul reign. Although you shouldn't turn your back on your promise. What? Of course not. I know you want a more brighter, productive future for us. One that only knows peace instead of war, like the conquest for the crystals. But Dameon, we have to fight back. I understand, but it won't be good for our offspring growing up in such dark conditions. and it's far too soon to wage war. This is only an isolated incident, far away from any other nation, at some desolated island. Promise me, my love, that you must not fight against Tenebrae. Even with Dragon Rose gone, you may be a victim at the tribe's enchantment again. I want us to settle, have a normal, more blissful life, and to restore our kingdom's reputation as one that'll bring forth light and peace, not bringing forth war and death. When you love someone, you live with them and for them. You cannot gamble on a life. Please, Cecil, I don't want to lose you again. She looked so troubled and fragile, and so sad as her eyes glistened in their turquoise hue. After a few moments of consideration, the devoted paladin eventually gave in. All right, we won't stand up against Tenebrae. It is much too soon to make our move now. It'll just provoke them and us as well. But when the time comes, we will fight. But perhaps we should bide our time until then. She smiled widely from ear to ear, though Cecil had a feeling of slight displeasure. Thank you. The pair deeply embraced each other in their arms once more. Thus concludes Cecil's challenges involving the Injukhal and his doppelganger. However, his personal endeavors are far from done. Promise of restoring peace and showing his love both to Rosa and to his kingdom still weigh heavily on the young holy warrior. Never-ending are the perilous and the rewarding fruits of both success and failure provided amongst the trials of a king. So as you can see, Dameon was the main villain throughout the whole story, manipulating the Injukhal, taking over Tenebrae. Dameon and Dragon Rose were just disloyal subjects, while Chief Abdullah was unaware of his schemes. He was once a trusted warrior during harsh times who later fell for Dragon Rose and eventually usurped the tribe and her for himself. He goes by his motto, domination or death. We also get to see Dameon, and it's a pretty similar image to one of the African dancers that stood out the most. Case in point was the clip in Sesame Street of all things. Describes Dameon's outfit, and it's one of the major inspirations for the whole story. I believe it was called African Dance in the Park, but I could be wrong. I wish I could find it. This scene was inspired by the old fanfic titled Embrace by Celeste Shear from fanfiction during my early years. I always hated lemons. I hope it's not too provocative. So, is the only focus on the descriptions and making love without describing the characters' emotions and romance they have. So Dragon Rose, Dameon, and Chief Abdullah are all killed, but only Dameon remains as the Injukhal's new head honcho. Of course, Cecil was torn between the promise he made to Rosa. He was torn on settling down, as well as the civil war and vision he had. What would be the tribe's next move? What would Dameon do to dominate the world? Only time will tell, since this was actually made before the interlude existed. Looks like a possible sequel in the works. I should really thank Cerb for all her hard work, as well as Azurelly, my collaborator, who is only on DeviantArt. Since we're all Final Fantasy IV fans, I'm always so damn sick of it always being pushed under the rug during a foolish debate between 6 and 7 being the best games in the series, as well as having the perfect villains. Thank you, Quarter Guy. Seriously, they've been glorified far too much, especially 7 with a remake. Like, the remake, really, guys? Although, I understand that 6 has its moments. Aside from the nefarious sequel, the after years, Final Fantasy IV is hands down the best in my book. Always. So I hope you all enjoyed this tale just as much as I did writing it, even though the concept was made years ago, which is from my old account, Dark Soul 26. Stay tuned to see what'll happen next to both the King of Baron and the Dark Lord of the Injukhal. That's right, guys. I've made a sequel to this, The Conquest of the Blue Planet, which will be my next project. So, I hope you guys like this story, even though it's like made 10 years ago. It's like 2010 all over again. and I think that was the same time I discovered the After Years. Speaking of which, I might play the epilogue from that. It's quite fitting at the end of this story. So, I'll see you guys in part 2, Conquest of the Blue Planet. Until then, this is the Ecron Writer signing out. Stay tuned, guys.